we're coming to you live from Taipei International Convention Center, right here in the heart of Taipei, for this election special of Taiwan Talks. I'm Ying Kavat. Today, Taiwan votes for a new president as Tsai Ing-wen steps down after 2 terms. We're also voting for a new parliament. Now it's 4 p.m., which means that voting has officially closed, and manual counting will start later across the 18,000 polling booths in Taiwan. We expect the results later tonight, and Taiwan Plus will be broadcasting live until 10 p.m. Now back to Taiwan Talks. Joining us on our panel today are Lai I-Chung, Prospect Foundation President, Alexander Huang, KMT International Affairs Director, Amanda Hsiao, International Crisis Group Senior Analyst on China, and Tao Yifeng, National Taiwan University Political Science Associate Professor. A very warm welcome to the show today, everyone. Now, Amanda, I want to first take a broader look for our global audience. Now, this election has significant implications for the region and the world. Briefly, why?
Well, one reason, I can think of 2. One reason is simply that Taiwan is one of the issues that could bring U.S. and China directly into a conflict. And that conflict would have global ramifications economically. A recent study shows that the cost would be $10 trillion to the entire world. And the second reason, I think, is simply that Taiwan is a thriving democracy. And as such, it is an example for other democracies that's dealing with a more complex world and figuring out how to deal with their relationship with authoritarian countries.
Lai I-Chung, let's talk more about the democracy side. Why is Taiwan's election so important?
I think just like every democracy, especially this time, that we're going to elect a new president and also a new parliament. So that the new president, new parliament, which means that the political direction as well as the composition and the execution of the policy will be very different from it was in the past. Especially Taiwan will enter the so-called post-Tsai Ing-wen era. The last 8 years of the steady craftsmanship and the statesmanship of the Tsai Ing-wen's leadership will go to the end. So we are going to welcome and explore what the new era will be. So that's how this election matters.
And basically in a democracy that's on the front line against autocracy. Let's turn now to Alexander, the voter turnout. Now, last night we have the final rallies for all 3 political parties here in Taipei. The turnout was fantastic. So, for example, the TPP is claiming 450,000 people on site and online, and the KMT and the DPP around 200,000. Now, in the last presidential election, there was a voter turnout in 2020 of 75%. Now, this ranks very highly across democracies in the world. Now, do you think that 2024 can beat that?
Well, we used to say that based on our accumulated experience, that the voting turnout had been above 70%. And this time, especially this morning, if you go out and look at the traffic, I personally drove all the way down to Taoyuan and come back. It was packed with people, and I believe that this year the turnout would probably get closer to what we have seen 4 years ago.
Yifeng Tao, do you agree with that? So you maybe more than 75% this year?
Well, I'm not that sure. I think 4 years ago that was an exception, because since we have the presidential election in 1996, I think the turnout rate has been going down through the decades. And 4 years ago, I think it was an exception because of what happened in Hong Kong. So the turnout rate, especially for young voters, were especially high 4 years ago. So I think this year probably we will go back to normal. So I will predict the turnout rate is about 70%.
Wow. Okay, so a different view there. Now, as counting hasn't actually begun yet, let's, for reference, look back at that 2020 presidential election and the results there, in which Tsai Ing-wen won her decisive second term. We can see that she secured more than 8 million votes, translating to 57% of votes cast. Now, Han Kuo-yu from the Kuomintang received 5.5 million votes, or 38%, and the People First Party's James Song received more than 600,000 votes, equating to 4.3% of the vote. Now, let's take a look at those results across Taiwan in a little bit more detail. We're going to show a map that shows Taiwan. And the blue there is the KMT and the DPP is green. We can see that the DPP in 2020 won 16 counties or cities to the KMT's 6. Let's also take a look this year. There are 3 candidate pairs, just the same as the last election. Let's take a look at who they are. For the Taiwan People's Party is Wen-je, former Taipei mayor and former surgeon, and his vice presidential candidate, Cynthia Wu. For the Democratic Progressive Party, there's current Vice President Lai Ching-te, a Harvard-educated former doctor, with Bi-khim Hsiao, former representative to the U.S. as his running mate. And finally, for the Kuomintang, new Taipei Mayor Hou Yo-i, who was a former police chief, and his running mate Hsiao Kang. Now, let's go back to the question. So, President Lai, incidents that may have swayed voters today. 2 incidents in recent days. One was a controversial interview by former KMT President Ying-jeou to Deutsche Welle media, and the second was the government's reaction to a launch of a satellite by China over Taiwan. Sorry, let me redirect that one to Alexander. So both Hou Yo-i and Hsiao Kang distanced themselves from Ma Ying-jeou's comments. Why do they do that?
I think it's a calculation of how people in such a short period of time to react to a report, especially impact on the headline.
Could you tell us what Ma actually said?
Ma actually said that if Chinese President Xi Jinping was taking, at least at this moment, a peaceful approach to deal with the political differences across the Taiwan-Strait. I believe that Ma Ying-jeou, based on his personal experience, he thought that peaceful means should be supported. And so he burst out by saying that we should believe that he is trying to take a peaceful ways to deal with this issue. But if you cut it and make it a headline, it became that we should trust Xi Jinping. Then that will have a direct impact, because the news came out immediately after, 2 days before the ballot. People might not get into the detail, but react to the headline. And that's why that people might get confused. That's why the candidate, Hou Yo-i and Hsiao Kang, try to distance themselves from former President Ma Ying-jeou.
So are you trying to say that it was a reflex reaction from the two, from Hou Yo-i and from Hsiao Kang?
Right, because this is a campaign season. I mean, people voted not based on the full text, but people based on their impression. And that's why you got only 2 days. You have to do that immediately.
Amanda, what do you think about whether this incident serves to play in the DPP's favor?
Well, I think that it's unclear what the actual impact will be on the voting. I think it serves to reinforce beliefs in both camps. It certainly undercuts what the Ho campaign has been saying.
So why does it do that? I just want to sort of distill down the 3 points, and maybe, Alexander, you can tell me if it's not aligned with what Ma said. Number one, he said that he did trust Xi Jinping. He was asked whether Xi Jinping was a dictator. He was then asked whether he trusts Xi Jinping, and I understand that he said yes.
I think based on Ma Ying-jeou, his personal impression or feeling, because they two did meet before.
So on a person-to-person level, he does trust.
I think so.
He said that.
Okay. Number one, he is a former president.
Yeah.
Number two, he's not running.
Okay.
He has
I do
no
want to get back to
position.
Amanda. So
Yeah.
it's just to check with you that this was said. He also said Taiwan would never win a war with China. And the other key point was that unification would be acceptable to Taiwan under certain circumstances, as you said, if it was a democratic and it was a peaceful decision. Amanda.
So for me, I think what's more concerning than the trust comment is, in a way, Ying-jeou is saying that there's no other choice but to trust or to work with China. I think the more concerning part is the suggestion that it's a lost cause in terms of defense spending and defense reform. After all, Ho has been campaigning on stepping up Taiwan's defenses as the other two presidential candidates have been doing. And so at a minimum, this shows that I think within the KMT, there still exists a diversity of views as to how to balance their proposed conciliatory approach to China with defense spending and reform.
Okay, and Yifeng, let's talk about the rocket launch. So basically, this was a satellite launched by China, which was mistranslated in English as a missile. The government, for the first time, issued a public alert to everybody's mobile phones in Taiwan. Yeah. Now, why was the DPP criticized for this?
Well, I think after it has been clarified by the Ministry of National Defense, I think it is a technical problem. But when it just happened, everybody get a message. I think all the parties reacted in the context of the election. So DPP just tried to calm down the voters. There is nothing big deal. That's DPP's response. And for KMT and the TPP, they just try to criticize DPP, say they try to politicize the issue. And they say DPP just want to use this alert to warn Taiwanese people about China's military threat. So I think all of them react to this event politically. So as it turned out, it's just a technical problem. So I think none of them really gain any votes from this event. But back to President Ma Ying-jeou's comment, I think the damage is not only about the voters in Taiwan, because in Taiwan's context, probably KMT can say Ma Ying-jeou was quote out of context. But just as you said, the whole interview is in English. And I think in the English it's very clear President Ma sounds like a Chinese government official rather than a former Taiwan president. He said that there is no possibility for Taiwan to win the war. So Taiwan have to talk to China. And in that context, Taiwan have to trust Xi. So that's why Ho and Zhao must explain to the world in an international press conference to clarify their status on this issue.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question, Lai I-Chung. Looking more broadly now, what are the key factors in this election to determine how people vote? Is it along party lines, do you think? Is it candidate charisma or the China factor?
Yeah, it's a combination of those. Of course, in Taiwan, the cross-strait relations in the presidential election always weigh significant in people's mind for their decision. But in addition to that, I think the local issue, the economy, the daily bread and butter issues, that also play a significant part for their decisions. And of course, in Taiwan, that a lot of people, they vote for a certain candidate, not because of policy, but because of whether they like this person as a personality, or they feel some attachment to certain people, or what this person or that person demonstrate a certain specific character that they feel affiliated to. So I think it's a combination of all those factors.
Which is the heaviest? Which gets the greatest proportion?
Usually people talk about the cross-strait relation and the economy. Those are the two issues people talk about the most. But there are exceptions, such as in year 2000s, the corruptions issue and the clean justice. That was the important issue that people voted for the Chen Shui-bian to outseat unseat the KMT candidate. And in the year 2008, I think it is also similar issues of corruptions that the people vote for Ma Ying-jeou and instead of the voting for the Frank Hsiao in that campaign.
Okay. Now, Alex, the next 4 years has some key global events. Of course, later this year, in November, it's the U.S. election. In 2027, it's the 100th anniversary of the People Liberation Army, and it's also the year that Xi Jinping has ordered his military to have the capability to take Taiwan. Now, as a way of talking about the different candidates' strengths or weaknesses, could you outline what you think is the biggest challenge facing Taiwan's next president? And if you could address Hou Yu-ih, how would he react that is different to the other candidates?
I think, you know, our discussion up to now had a, you know, highlight that the next 4 years will be extremely challenging for Taiwan, whoever is elected. Given the information that you just provided, we will see that the biggest challenge for our next president is how China would react to this election and how China will look into the next 4 years and its relationship with Taiwan. We all know that the military balance is extremely in favor of mainland China. And that's why during the entire Hou Yu-ih campaign, we try to remind people that you know, this election is very crucial for Taiwan to reduce the fever, to downplay or to cut the tension. Tension reduction, threat you know, management would be very crucial for Taiwan in the next 4 years.
So Alex, if I can
yes.
ask you, so if ahead of 2027, Xi Jinping tells Hou Yu-ih, if he is the president of Taiwan, he wants to start unification.
I mean, Xi Jinping can say this to whoever is elected.
Yes, but I'm asking you about Hou Yu-ih.
But we have made our position very clear that we wanted to resume cross-strait authorized regular conversation and communication line. But we will not get into any political dialogue or any of sort that related to unification dialogue. We will not do that.
Okay.
No matter what kind of pressure
So
we
how
have.
does he handle that challenge in the years to come?
I think if we are not talking to each other and there's no communication line, and Xi Jinping said the same thing, that will be very difficult for Taiwan to react. But I think if KMT is elected, that based on the communication lines, we can have functional issue dialogue resumed. We can have tourism and also other economic dialogue.
Imminent unification talks? How does dialogue help that?
That will reduce the tension, you know, because there
not the
are
intent.
building blocks that make sure that we can kick the can down the road and will not push them to raise this issue too early, and because we need to buy that time. Therefore, we emphasize that we need to resume dialogue on the issues that directly related to the interest of the people, like our exports to mainland China, people-to-people exchange.
But when it comes to the crunch, and Xi Jinping wants to talk about unification.
The entire world, the entire works that we prepare to do is not to get that D-Day coming. Okay, that's our intent.
Okay, I'm clear on that now. Amanda, would you like to address a Kerr presidency in terms of the next 4 years? What do you believe will be the biggest challenge, and how will Kerr handle that based on what we can see through his campaign differently to the other two candidates?
So first, I think 2 measures of success for the next leader of Taiwan is, 1, the ability to keep a lid on cross-strait tensions. And there's a lot of definitions as to how much tension is acceptable, I think. And number 2, that the next leader continues to push forward some of the defense reforms that Tsai Ing-wen has started. So those would be the 2 measures. As for Ke, he, on the latter, has said very clearly that he will increase defense budget to 3% of GDP. So we have that as a campaign promise. As for China and the U.S., Ke has also pledged to make relations with China slightly less hostile. He's open to engagement with China.
So how does that stand him in good stead if Xi Jinping then wants to talk about unification?
So I think the issue is how does he balance those two prongs of a strategy? And furthermore, engaging in dialogue with China generally asks for political preconditions for dialogue. And he has not offered a clear alternative for the formulation that he would use in place of the 82 consensus or something else that could satisfy Beijing's demands. So I think there are a lot of questions that remain around what a Ke presidency would look like. In terms of unification talks, I think Beijing is quite aware that the vast majority of Taiwanese people are not in favor of unification. But it's definitely true that Beijing will likely, once dialogue begins, try to extract more political accommodation. So at that point, regardless of who is in charge, it will require a lot of leadership and careful management.
Do you see any daylight between how Ho would handle it versus Ko?
How the two would handle it. I would say this, I think that we are in a world of greater uncertainty under a Ke presidency simply because we have much fewer data points as to what the TPP and Ke stands for in terms of cross-strait relations.
Okay. Lai I-Chung, very briefly, if there was a Lai president, what would be the biggest challenge and how would he handle it different to the other two candidates?
I think firstly, definitely will be the how to keep the cross-strait tension, not to escalate to the extent that the hostile condition will happen, and at the same time keep the defense reform to progress and in a much faster speed. And I also say that the Lai Ching-te needs to strengthen the like-minded democracies and for the first island chain to form a solid diplomatic security network as the foundation for Taiwan to deal with China. So those are going to be the important thing. And I think President Lai, should he get elected, probably the Bi-khim Hsiao will play a significant role in shaping all those alternatives.
Do you believe a Ho president could push back, as Alex said, can make this, the tensions, any possible military action, kick it further down the line, whereas Lai cannot?
I will say that my take will be very different from Amanda and Alexander in the sense that it is not about unification or independence issue that China right now is seeing in Taiwan, but for the Ho and Ke, for both of them to be the president, China immediately will demand a kind of the economic as well as the technology of what Taiwan can help China to break through the U.S. sanctions.
Okay.
And so that's going to be the biggest challenge, and that's going to be very quick, instead of the political talk that's going up.
Okay. Now today, Taiwan is a multi-party democracy, but that wasn't always the case. Let's find out how Taiwan's history shapes its current politics and why it will shape the country's future. Take a look. Taiwan must elect a new president today. Will that decision move the country closer to unification with China or further away? Or will it maintain the status quo all parties say they want? But first, why does Communist China threaten democratic Taiwan? In China, the Communists once fought a war to unseat the Kuomintang KMT, or Chinese nationalists. That China was the Republic of China, ROC, and the Civil War lasted from 1945 to 1949. By the end, the KMT, or the ROC, were overthrown and fled to Taiwan. Despite this history, the opposition KMT today urges the strongest China ties of all Taiwan's political parties.
The KMT has, of course, historically been anti-communist, and then they shifted to a much more China-friendly position. This current position reflects the fact that they believe that they are part of one larger Chinese entity.
What binds the KMT and the CCP is a belief that both sides of the Taiwan-Strait are one China. What separates them is who governs. Beijing insists it's the People's Republic of China. This is its one China principle. The KMT says it's the ROC government. After a non-official meeting in 1992, both sides agreed to disagree, enabling relations between them. This verbal-only agreement is the 1992 consensus. In conjunction with that, Beijing uses one country, two systems, the Hong Kong model, when referring to Taiwan. Meanwhile, the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, in power for 8 years under Tsai Ing-wen, insists both sides of the Taiwan Strait are not subordinate to each other. The DPP rejects any form of the 92 consensus or one country, two systems. They say both are the same thing, Taiwan agreeing to unification. In response, Beijing refuses dialogue with the DPP and labels them pro-independence separatists, where declaring independence is a red line that can provoke war. Yet the DPP says Taiwan is already de facto independent, so no formal declaration is needed. It's nearly 30 years since Taiwan held its first presidential election in 1996, at the time crowning a rapid economic rise. Today, if an opposition party wins, it will be the fourth change of power in Taiwan's democratic history. In this election, DPP candidate and current Vice President Lai Ching-te has proposed a four-pillar peace plan to manage China. It consists of deterrence, economic diversification, democratic partnerships, and principled pragmatic China relations.
The first two priorities is really concerning about Taiwan's own effort to strengthening its capabilities and resilience in both the defense front and the economic front. And thirdly, talk about international partnership. Last but not least, we talk about China. It's very clear that the majority of the world's trade goes through Taiwan Strait, so it's an international problem. It's not for the China to dictate.
Meanwhile, the KMT is shifting policy to remain relevant to an electorate where more than 60% identify as Taiwanese only, rather than both Taiwanese and Chinese, or Chinese only.
KMT learned from the past that they have to stand for Taiwan. They have to stand stronger for Taiwan. So they put deterrence policy at the very beginning of the 3D policy. The KMT believe only if the both sides of Taiwan Strait can talk to each other, then they can increase the mutual understanding and at the same time decrease the tension. There's no way at this moment, there's no reason to believe Hou Yu-ih will immediately pursuing unification in the short time.
The KMT says it also rejects one country, two systems, recognizing its failure to offer Hong Kong its autonomy. The third party, the Taiwan People's Party, also rejects one country, two systems, along with the stances of the two main parties. It wants to warm up ties with China while maintaining autonomy. TPP candidate and former Taipei Mayor Wen-je also proposes deterrence along with what he calls the five mutuals: mutual acknowledgement, understanding, respect, cooperation, and absolution.
A lot of this comes down on really a matter of trust. How much trust the different parties have in Beijing. If we look at Beijing's position on Hong Kong, whether it's the Sino-British Joint Declaration or the Basic Law, if you look at Beijing's position on the South China Sea, its promises and actually a treaty to respect Ukraine's sovereignty, Beijing have reneged on all these.
What Xi Jinping has promised Taiwan has not been mutual reciprocity, but it has been constant and unequivocal.
祖国统一是历史必然，两岸同胞要携手同心，共享民族复兴的伟大荣光。
Today, voters must determine how best to manage China at a time when Beijing is tightening the screws on democracy, freedom, and Taiwan's very existence.
Well, let's have a look at the very latest results that are coming in. These have been compiled from the Public Television Service and the CEC, the Central Election Commission. Now, they're running along the right and the bottom of your screen, as you can see. And we have Lai Ching-te of the DPP in the lead with 39% of votes, and that comes to 60,000 votes. Second is Hou Youyi of the KMT. He's on 31% of the votes, which is 49,000 votes. And in third place currently is the TPP's Wen-je on 29% at 46,000. Along the bottom, you can see those same presidential votes being divided or being spread out in terms of where they're coming across Taiwan, currently New Taipei City. Now, let's go back to discussion of that report that we just saw. What I want to talk about is Taiwanese identity, why it's so polarizing, why it's important to understand Taiwanese politics. And I'd first actually like to ask each of you, guess how you identify. Lai I-Chung.
Yeah, sure, I'm Taiwanese.
Taiwanese, okay. Alex?
Yeah, of course. I was born and raised here, and I served in the Marine, and I have been our Foreign Service officer. Of course, Taiwan.
Taiwanese, okay. Amanda?
Perhaps this might be a bit interesting, and it's less sensitive since I'm not a political figure, but actually growing up, I referred to myself as Chinese.
Oh, interesting.
And it took me some time to realize that there's a distinction there between Chinese and Taiwanese, and a lot of it is actually tied up in cultural rituals and a sense of cultural linkage. Yeah, but now I identify as Taiwanese American.
Right, okay. And Yifeng?
Okay, in Taiwan's political context, my father is the so-called mainlander,
Right.
and my mother is the so-called Taiwanese. So I'm a kind of a mix. But now I think I identify myself as a Taiwanese, as many people in Taiwan now. After democratization, I think the Taiwanese identity has grown hand in hand with democratization.
Okay, and Yifeng, why is it so polarizing in Taiwan?
Well, I think Taiwanese identity at this moment is not so polarizing. I think it is very high, and the second high is both Taiwanese and the Chinese. And nowadays in Taiwan, only very tiny population identify themselves as Chinese. And just as I said, I think the Taiwanese identity go hand in hand with democratization over the last 30 years. And it has increased very rapidly during Ma Ying-jeou's 8 years. And also in 2019, when Hong Kong got the repression from Beijing before the national security law. So I think when Taiwan got more pressure from China, we have a stronger identity with Taiwan because we somehow identify ourselves with the democratic system. I think it's cross-party line. No matter you are DPP, KMT, TPP, all of us identify with our political system.
Yeah, Lai I-Chung. I mean, the DPP promotes the Taiwanese identity more than the other parties there. And as Yifeng Tao there mentioned, the more China exerts its military power, its economic coercion, the more there is created a separate Taiwanese identity. Is this the reason why it's so controversial?
But I think that before the martial law been lifted, the rule by the Chiang Kai-shek and Jiang Zhiguo government on Taiwan is actually saying that you are Taiwanese is a crime. And the Chinese identity is official recognized identity, and everyone has been forced to recognize with the Chinese. So that the rising of Taiwanese identity is actually a process that the identification in the past has been suppressed. Due to the democracy, they were able to reemerge. So this is there's a certain element of a decolonization process in it. I think that cannot be ignored. Of course, the Chinese military threat and all the differences between Taiwan and China, that also helps to forge the identity, especially for the people. They came from the mainlanders in heritage, and then later they started to find out the differences. So their identification with the Taiwanese, and sometimes a little bit different from the so-called the suppressed Taiwanese identity. But right now, the democracy helped to get everything together so that we have the very different Taiwanese identity than it was like 40 years ago.
And is that in line with kind of this feeling of Taiwan's sovereignty? Alex?
Well, I tended to agree with the two ladies left to me that it is a mix. But right now, if you put political factors into it, if you
But you can't divorce it from political figures.
right, and then the identity issue become more controversial.
But you cannot separate these two.
Exactly. That's what I have said when I work in the government. I said we were torn by two Bs, the blood and the brain, because our brain is democracy, is separate identity. But I believe that in Taiwan today, the real issue, especially in the next 4 years, that's why I said this election is so important, because we do not need to prove our Taiwanese identity again by ballots. You know, this election is not about identity. It's about security and personal interest. So I think that voters will make their decision, whether they will vote by identity again, or more on the economy, their personal interests, or the security situation across the Taiwan-Strait.
Is it, Amanda? So Alex is saying seems to be saying it's mutually exclusive.
So I think that is partly true, and we know this because we have decades of data that show us that even though affiliation with the Taiwanese identity has grown, it hasn't affected the fact that the vast majority of the Taiwanese population prefer to maintain the status quo. So it doesn't affect political preferences in terms of, it's not pushing more people towards formal independence. So I think that is true. Nevertheless, I do think that your sense of self does translate into what you think is the best approach for Taiwan vis-a-vis China, the kind of relationship you think Taiwan should have, how far away or how close?
To China.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yifeng, so let's talk about Chinese interference in this campaign. The DPP has called China's interference an unprecedented campaign, using everything from military activity to trade or economic pressure. How would you characterize this election's interference compared to past years?
Well, I think China has tried to interfere into Taiwan's election since 1996. I think during 1996, when we have the first general election for the president, they also have a very big military exercise around Taiwan. And for this kind of action is always counterproductive. But this time, I think they have changed their strategy. Besides a military threat, verbally and militarily, they have intervened in kind of a subtle way. They have influence on social media and on misinformation and disinformation.
So would you disagree that's an unprecedented campaign?
I agree, and I think now it's subtle but pervasive. It's quite different from before. Yeah, so we can see the interference not only the talk by President Xi Jinping, but also in many information and the disinformation and the economic sanction. Yeah, it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, and so what is the message, Lai I-Chung, that China, Beijing, wants to give to the Taiwanese population?
I think if you look at the Taiwan Affairs Office, the Song Tao and of course Xi Jinping also indicated, but Song Tao made it more very clearly, and Zhang Zhijun as well, about this election is about war and peace, which just thinly veiled that they dislike a certain candidate and asking people not to vote for that particular candidate. And so that's how they term it. And I would also say about the disinformation and election interference by China, We believe that at this time we also see the so-called high-tech tool has been deployed by China, not just about disinformation, but also the AI-controlled bots and trolls, as well as the deepfake through the images, the migration to create the false images about certain candidates. That has been deployed and has been verified that this came from China. So this is important issues that not only this time we have to deal with, but later on, it's going to be persistent in all the election in Taiwan.
Alex?
I think our friends overseas should understand that political warfare or united front against Taiwan has been constant for decades. And the normalized combat readiness patrol surrounding or encircling Taiwan to the 24 nautical miles perimeter have been there way before this campaign. So number one, we should understand that the Chinese pressure, no matter is by military or by disinformation or misinformation campaign, they are constant toward Taiwan.
So you're not saying
that during the election, they will apply others. We all agree, but we have to understand they do that. Number two is that this is a challenge for democracy around the world. Because it's not only, by saying or emphasize or enlarge the discussion about disinformation campaign only during the campaign season, it is not correct for me. I think we should be alert to, constantly throughout our usual daily life.
So you're talking about the media attention only focuses during the election?
I think that that's the most. And I also think that in the coming elections in the countries around the world, that they will experience different kind of tactics.
Okay, so China doesn't want to just influence Taiwan's elections, but other elections around the world. But it's interesting because China's disinformation, very clearly the message is that they want Taiwan. Beijing said that Taiwanese must make the right choice. So that choice apparently is to vote for the KMT. Why is that?
I think, if we, learn our lessons, every time when China tried to exercise that kind of disinformation campaign or interference in our election, the victim has always been KMT. And we have told them, yes, because people try to vote against them by not voting for KMT. So we are actually the victim.
Right.
And we told them so.
So in this election, do you think that they have gone over the line?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so because, actually, the satellite rocket is different from, a ballistic missile.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So
one is a security threat, one is surveillance.
Right. So I understand all kinds of campaign tactics, spin masters. But making a satellite rocket as a ballistic missile and try to influence Taiwan voters' impression was not done by the forces outside of Taiwan, and that's true.
Okay, that was a reply back to one of our initial questions. Okay, Amanda, if Lai wins, as we saw, he's in the lead currently. If he goes on to win, it will be an unprecedented third term for any political party in Taiwan. Now, what message would this send to China? What conclusions would they draw from that about Taiwanese?
So in an ideal world, Beijing would sit back and say, we have to recalibrate our broken cross-strait approach, which is not particularly effective at promoting its own objective, which is unification. And to say to themselves that given that the DPP has tremendous political staying power, that we should also find a way of getting along with them. But that's unlikely to be the case. I think in reality, what will happen is Beijing will find this to be threatening to its interests, its near-term interests. It will feel perhaps greater imperative to show strength in response to a Lai victory. And so it's likely that we'll see an increase in perhaps more subtle pressures in the beginning, immediately after the election. So,
Let me just kind of distill a little bit. So, will it say to China, to Xi Jinping, that Taiwanese do not want unification, peaceful unification, and therefore the conclusion must be that in order to take Taiwan, it must be forceful?
I don't think that the conclusion will be as drastic for a number of reasons. One, I think that Beijing has, since really the Ma Ying-jeou years in 2016 or in 2014, considerably lowered its expectations at that point of what can be achieved with Taiwan. If it's waiting, at that point, I think there was still a possibility of hoping to change Taiwanese people's sentiment vis-a-vis China. And I don't think that is Beijing's approach anymore. Its approach doesn't really depend on political changes in Taiwan as much as it did before. And that's because it saw that under the Ma Ying-jeou years, even though it offered a variety of economic carrots, which were intended to make it clear to Taiwanese that unification will be for your own good, that in fact it had the opposite effect, right? And that in fact it made Taiwanese voters say to themselves, wait a minute, this economic integration, what's the cost of this? And will it come at the cost of our political autonomy? And so I think Beijing already has a fairly clear view of the extent of how far either political parties can go, to be honest. So it can't get unification under the KMT, but nor will it get formal independence under the DPP.
Okay. Let's move on now, and Yifeng, if you can take the first question. Let's have a look at how China would react to either of these candidates becoming Taiwan president. Now, on Friday, China's defense ministry said that it would crush or it would smash any independence plots. And as we mentioned, Beijing has said that Taiwan needs to make the right choice. Now, when it comes to the different candidates' cross-strait policies, they seem on the surface to be quite similar. All three want to keep the status quo. Could you perhaps talk to us about a co-president and how you think the dynamics would be with China?
You mean if co-Wen-je
Yeah, if
elected?
co-Wen-je. So if looking at their policies, for example, will there be mutual respect and absolution if there is a co-president with China, with Xi Jinping?
Well, I think among the three candidates, just like other guests already say, I think co-Wen-je probably is the most unpredictable one. So I'm not quite sure whether Beijing will trust him. Neither will Washington, D.C. So I think we will be in a very uncertain era. And he himself actually have changed his position several times. So I think even now, probably he himself don't know what he will react to certain kind of offer or certain kind of pressure from Beijing. So it's really hard to say.
It's kind of an unknown, isn't it? Yeah. Lai I-Chung, I'm going to swap you guys around. So Lai I-Chung, if you can actually talk about a Ho president and how Xi Jinping would react to a Ho president.
And as I just mentioned earlier, I think the Xi Jinping right now facing a whole presidency, probably the first thing is not about how he demands Xi on the political negotiation on unification versus independence, but more on the issues about how how China could see Taiwan as a friend in helping China to break through the technology sanction placed by the United States, as well as help China to get through its economic difficulties. For example, he will probably ask the whole presidency to introduce more investment scheme for Taiwan to invest to China, and also to help the Taiwan to further the Taiwan and China technology and the engineering exchanges to help China to break through some of the technology barrier in semiconductor, for example, or other technology that right now China just cannot have due to the patent held by the United States. I think that's going to be the number one issues that at least in Chinese mind, how to deal with the problem, and also that can be built as the measure or testament about the commitment of the whole in complying with the Chinese demand.
And would this increase economic dependency or integration?
I'm not going to say it's going to increase the economic dependency, but how Taiwan could play a role in helping China to break through the economic difficulties. Yeah.
Alexander, do you want to reply to that?
Well, I think we should not be misunderstood because we have said that very clear that a whole presidency will not do anything with mainland China at the expense or at the cost of our close relations with our allies, especially the United States. In terms of critical sensitive technology, we support the small yard high fence, policy. We are in line with the interest of our partners and allies. What we are trying to achieve is for threat reduction, crisis prevention, based on the communication line. And KMT is the only party that can maintain, and with the accumulated talent to maintain such a dialogue. So the communication line is for threat reduction. It's not for appeasing Beijing.
Okay.
I think our position has been very clear.
Okay. Do you want to talk about a Lai president?
Well,
and in terms of
the
how
first reaction would be buckle up, because a Lai victory will send a signal to Beijing that Taiwan will be governed by a DPP again for 4 more years. And William Lai is no Tsai Ing-wen, for sure. And the United States.
What do you mean by that?
Because Vice President Lai has his own track records that the world understand, that he has supported the de jure Taiwan independence when he was young, and he has changed his narrative in the past 2 years several times. And right now, or before the campaign season started, he said he will follow President Tsai's steps.
I also have to say, though, that Zhao Xiaokang, the vice presidential candidate for Hou has made pro-unification comments previously, but now he's also stepped back from that.
Yeah, I think the pro-unification was not the unification under one-party dictatorship, not a unification that become part of the People's Republic of China when Zhao Xiaokang and the other KMT politicians were talking about. So I think, without getting into too much historical details, narrative, I think, Beijing's reaction to the election result will be a significant part for our allies and friends to assess the future contingency in the Taiwan-Strait.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have some news that's just come in from the Central Election Commission. It is about the voter turnout in Taipei City. Let's take a look. So in 2024, the turnout is 70.64%. This is down from 2020, where there was 76.31%. This is only for Taipei City. And of course, we did discuss voter turnout. Whether this reflects the whole country, we will find out later on. Now, we're an hour into the counting of the ballots across Taiwan. Let's take a look at those figures. Running down the right-hand side of your screen, Lai Ching-te of the DPP, Lai Ching-te of the DPP is still in the lead at 37%. He has 308,000 votes. Second place is Hou of the KMT on 32% with 260,000 votes, and Wen-je of the TPP in third place with 29% of the vote, 240,000. Along the bottom, as we mentioned before, are those same votes, but by county or city. Now, we're also very pleased to welcome a new guest. She is Wei Ting Yen of Franklin and Marshall College, Assistant Professor of Government, waiting a very warm welcome to the show today. Now, the US is Taiwan's biggest international backer and arms supplier. And looking back on 2023, this was a significant year in terms of stronger relations between the US and Taiwan, from the meeting between Tsai Ing-wen and Kevin McCarthy, the former House Speaker, to $1 billion in presidential drawdown authority, which basically took weapons out of Americans' own stockpile to give to Taiwan. Also, there's been an increase in arms sale under the new National Defense Authorization Act. Now, according to the Financial Times, Joe Biden will send a high-level delegation, bipartisan, to Taiwan after the election results. Why is this significant?
So we have been seeing that under the outgoing Tsai administration, U.S. Taiwan relation has been improving and has been warming up, and there have been multiple delegations coming from the U.S. And so I think as a strong ally of Taiwan, also a strong supporter for democracy, I think it's significant for the U.S. to show Taiwanese people their support for Taiwan being a very democratic and successful democracy, continue as a sole thriving democracy in the Chinese-speaking world. And so I think Taiwanese people would appreciate that kind of delegation to show commitment for democracy as well.
Alex, of course, China would obviously see this as a provocation, and some other commentators are saying it's risky.
I think the United States, the Biden administration will send in a delegation immediately after our election. Is not only show the support of Taiwan democracy to ensure more to ensure that the American interests in this part of the world will be advanced or protected. And also, they want to have a first-hand understanding of the president-elect and his possible future policies. So it is also a function of strategic intelligence gathering. And after the delegation returned to Washington, as they practiced before, I think they will try to figure out that how this election result will have an impact on the future U.S. Taiwan relations, and even more the U.S. China relationship. I think the United States has been very proactive, and I'm glad that they are taking the initiative to send the delegation immediately to Taiwan after the election.
Okay. Lai I-Chung, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, also met last night with a Chinese official. His name is Liu Jianchao. What do we make of that meeting? Who is Liu? How significant is he?
Well, Liu Jianchao probably, according to the rumor mill, that he will become the next foreign minister for China.
To replace Qin Gang?
To replace Wang Yi. Because Wang Yi right now is a foreign minister, but he just came back to take the void that the Qin Gang left. So that Liu Jianchao probably will more of a fixers for that positions. And the Blinken's Secretary of State Blinken, his meeting with the Liu Jianchao also signifies that because the warning China not to for the election interference, and possibly that not to overreact to the election results. That was part of their discussion in their meetings. So in combination with the U.S. sent the delegation immediately after elections, I think the United States is trying to play its hand on the calming down the situation across the Taiwan Straits by talking to both Taiwan and China at the same time.
Okay. Amanda, let's talk about the U.S. reaction to each possible candidate as a future Taiwan president. We've spoken about how China may react. Can you take a look at how Washington would react to Lai as president versus Ho or Ke?
So I think with each of the candidates, there are questions that remain as to how each will execute their campaign visions. And so it's not that there's one that's particularly uncertain, though I will add that with Lai, what he has campaigned on is obviously continuity. We haven't seen a KMT administration in power for some time. So there's uncertainties around that simply because in the 8 years since, the world has changed quite significantly. And so we don't know how the KMT as a party has or has not adapted to it. And we've mentioned with Ke and the TPP, there's plenty of ambiguities. But going back to Lai very quickly, I think even though he has campaigned on continuity, he's made a couple of recent statements that I think means that going into a potential Lai presidency, there will still be some questions in DC as to what kind of president he will be and what his approach to cross-strait relations will be. So there will be a period of time in Washington is going to be sitting there and waiting and to sort of be parsing what he says about the relationship with China.
So what you're referring to there are the more pro-independence comments.
So he's known for a comment in 2017. He made a statement in the summer of last year about the political objective of Taiwan being that the Taiwanese president can walk into the White House. But more recently, he said at the presidential debate that he said that relying on the Republic of China Constitution to protect Taiwan in cross-strait relations would invite disaster, which diverges from President Tsai's position, which is that cross-strait affairs should be conducted in accordance with the ROC Constitution and relevant laws. So I think that was, those sorts of comments, I think at a minimum suggests that, raises questions about Lai's ability to maintain discipline when he is talking about cross-strait affairs.
Okay. Lai I-Chung, should there be some concerns over a Lai president?
I do not think that's going to be the concern, although there's some statement, whether that's back in like 7 years ago, in 2017, or when he was talking to in a casual way with his fans in the local counties about the step into the White House. Both of them, they are, the special letter of them basically talks about how those people want him to achieve. And he said, yes, I'm going to answer that call. But about how that's going to translate into the direct, whether that's going to be the unification versus independence, that's a completely different issues. Especially that William Lai take the Bi-khim Hsiao to be his running mate, and the Bi-khim Hsiao is known to be the old hands for the U.S. Taiwan relation and basically Taiwan's international affairs. So that, and also William Lai got elected, the good hands of the team that the President Tsai has will stay with him. So I think that he has a good team with him and also very good running mates to help to steer the foreign relationship. I do not think that Washington should be worried too much.
Okay, waiting, let's talk about a Ho president. Would Washington be worried about the will to defend Taiwan should there be an attack, given that Ho did say that he wanted to reduce conscription down to 4 months dependent on the threat? Obviously, this has just this year, in January, this month been increased to 1 year. That was a politically difficult decision for Taiwan.
So Ho did try to push that policy, but it backfired immediately. So he immediately withdrew his statement saying that we need to cut the military service from 1 year back to 4 months. But after Zhao Shaokan joined the tickets, he also proposed a 4-month, military service. So I think for the KMT, there is an internal divide within the KMT that they have to resolve before they can have a more, coherent policy, whether it's U.S. Taiwan or cross-strait relation. I don't think the U.S. is that concerned because if you look at Ho's statement facing U.S., the op-ed he published, which is also talking about his famous 3D, proposal. So deterrence is also in it. The problem, I think, is we see there is a discrepancy between when he talks to DC versus when he talks to domestic audience. And then we see the internal division. And so I think if there is a whole presidency, I think the party itself have to figure out first what's that coherent policy is. I agree with Amanda saying that the KMT hasn't been in office for a long time, and the world has been changing tremendously, structurally, and it's not yet very clear like how entirely the KMT leadership will help Taiwan, navigate through the situation. But I do believe that even with the whole presidency, he has that willingness to continue invest in Taiwan's defense, self-defense capability and deterrence and all that.
Alexander, how do voters, how do they reconcile these divisions, these discrepancies?
I think, a lot of comments are related to the political campaign and how they assess that they can get more votes by their statements. But it has been very clear, two things. Number one, Hou Yu, if elected, he will be the commander-in-chief. And I've been sitting next to him so many times and listened to his stories. And, I can testify that he even believed that 12-month training is not good enough as a police chief to take his men to the, action.
So you just said that they would say things for votes.
Because there are people believe that parents would worry more about the extension of the military service.
So what,
okay?
what does he
But the
believe?
policy has been very clear that both the term of military service and the defense spending are both threat-based. As long as the threat is there. Remember back in the 1950s and 60s, our defense spending and budget accounts for more than 5% of the GDP. So actually, KMT had a track record to react to the threat, by defining their defense expenditure as well as the need for how can we defend Taiwan.
But spending is a little bit different from conscription. Spending, you can alter that. I agree. But,
right.
But conscription, how can that be
I think we
altered?
have made our position clear, okay? The restore of 1 year military service kick in this month.
Yeah.
And we will continue that policy. And we will continue to adjust. And Zhao Xiaokang has said that we need to set the conditions before we think about even draw back or reduce the service term. But I can tell that in the next 4 years, if elected, a whole administration will not cut the service term of our draft or compulsory service, period.
You can guarantee that?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Okay.
No doubt about it.
No doubt about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Amanda, let's talk about the impact of this election on U.S.-China ties. Why are people saying it is a test of the efforts to stabilize relations between the U.S. and China?
So certainly, depending on the scenario that we face post-elections, I think the concern is that in a Lai victory scenario, that tensions across the strait will remain relatively high, and that Beijing might overreact, and therefore, Washington is itself facing an election in November, and so the political climate right now in D.C. is very much in campaign mode as well. And so when you combine a possible Beijing overreaction with a strong bipartisan view in D.C. that's fairly anti-China, there will be pressures on the Biden administration to then also respond to something that is seen as very provocative by China. And so, yeah, I think both sides, though, have been quite conscious of the possibility of the risks around this. And they've taken a lot of steps, including at the Xi-Biden meeting, to risk manage, I think. So, and some of those steps have been very clear, including the fact that we have seen a number of U.S.-China discussions follow through after the Xi-Biden meeting, including the meeting with Blinken and Liu just recently, but also military-to-military discussions have also resumed. So I do think that the two sides are fairly aware of the risks, and there's a fair amount of communications to manage it.
And so do you think that China will be taking the US election in November into their calculus of how much they can ratchet up or down the military response?
So I do think that is a factor in their decision making, absolutely. And I actually think that the Xi-Biden meeting had in its view the fact that 2024 was going to be turbulent. Taiwan elections, US elections, and that contributed, well, on top of China's economy. So on the Chinese side, the economy is not doing well. There's plenty of domestic issues to worry about. On the US side, the Biden administration wants to turn to the elections, but also there are a lot of things going on in the world right now. So all of this came together to incentivize, I think, both sides to not necessarily to de-escalate, but to hit a pause on escalation. And I don't think, given the atmosphere we're seeing right now, that either side wants to tear that apart immediately. They're trying to get through 2024 without too much turbulence.
Wei-ting, let's talk about the US role for Taiwan. We mentioned that they're the biggest international backer arms supply, but we should say in a little bit more detail that under the Taiwan Relations Act, the US, under law, is required to basically provide Taiwan with arms to defend itself as well as maintain its own capability to defend Taiwan from attack. In the Xi-Biden meeting, we also heard from the reports that they asked Joe Biden to support unification, China's unification with Taiwan. Xi also asked Biden to stop the arms sales. Do you think that this pressure will continue from the Chinese side on the US going into the election?
So, yeah, so I mean, China basically has been trying to pressure the US government to agree with the One China principle. And I think Biden has also made it very clear that the US policy is One China policy. So I don't think it's going to Beijing is not going to stop from saying what they want to say, no matter what Washington says. So I think Beijing will continue voice their stance in a consistent way throughout 2024. But at the same time, we also know that for Biden administration, under Taiwan Relation Act and under their current One China policy, I think they're not going to not do it, continue. They will continue to support Taiwan, especially now we see they have the Foreign Ministry finance and to continue supporting, having more to make Taiwan's self-defense capability to grow. I think we'll still continue seeing that to go even into 2024. I do believe that Biden and Xi, after their meeting in San Francisco, their relation has been going back to this open so they restore their military conversation. I think it's going to help with that open communication channel to make sure that they can continue have the conversation open and making sure there's no miscalculation. They don't have to agree with each other, but it's very important for each other to understand where they're at and what their stance are. Yeah.
Okay. Now let's move to Donald Trump. The US election we mentioned before in November. Many people are saying that there's likely to be a showdown between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. If Trump becomes president, Lai I-Chung, what does this mean for Taiwan?
Well, I know a lot of people have the doubt about the possible Trump presidency, judging from what he said and also the way that he said it. But I would state out the standard template. I believe that Taiwan, the new president, is willing to work with any democratically elected leader in the United States, just like the U.S. is willing to work with any democratically elected leader in Taiwan to further the relationship, and also Taiwan enjoy the bipartisan support within the United States. Both Republican and the Democrat, they have a strong support for Taiwan.
Will Trump support Taiwan, though?
Well, first of all, we look at the first Trump administrations. It did have a very strong track record about supporting Taiwan. And it is under the first Trump administration that changed the whole approach toward China and approach toward Taiwan.
But it was said that this was his advisors as opposed to himself, and that this time round he will actually install people who will follow his position.
I'm not going to speculate how he is going to stack up the experts and the advisors, but I'm just going to say that no matter who in the U.S. and Biden administration, we have a great relationship with them, and possible Trump administration, we had a good relationship with them as well in the past. That it's just a matter of the very diligent work to cultivate this relationship in order to ensure the Taiwan-U.S. relation will move forward.
Alex, can I get your position on this very briefly? But I just want to say that former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who was under Trump, told this program, Taiwan Talks, that he believes Trump would pull troops out of South Korea and Japan. How do you think a Trump presidency would impact Taiwan?
I think if we look back of the entire 4 years of Trump presidency, my sense is that he's not a person who wanted to send American men and women into a foreign war. He asks traditional allies to be more responsible for their own defense and also regional security. So we would probably see that more toward isolationism, if Trump is coming back to the White House. But also, I need to say that in the past several years, we have been getting into conversation and close communications with the people who might advise the future Republican administration. And I believe that not only Taiwan's value itself, strategic location, but also the long time friendship between Taiwan with both parties. I think Taiwan also maintained a very good relationship with Republicans on the Hill as well as in the think tank and the policy community. So there will be continuity that probably serve as the foundation, even if Trump is coming back to the White House.
Okay, thank you. Now we're 1.5 hours into counting on this very special election, 2024. Let's take a look at the results that are live, compiled by Public Television Service and the Central Election Commission. Running down the right-hand side of your screen, it seems that Lai Ching-te of the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, has marginally increased his lead. He's now at 39%. That's 530,000 votes. KMT's Hou Yo-i is in second place at 33% on 450,000 votes, and Wen-je of the TPP is on 27% with 360,000 votes. Running across the bottom, you can see Taichung City there. This is the count across the different counties and cities of Taiwan in terms of those presidential vote counts. Now, Amanda, let me come to you first. If the DPP's Lai Ching-te team wins tonight, tell us how important Lai's acceptance speech will be.
His acceptance speech will be very important. It will be parsed by both Beijing and Washington, not only for the specific words used, but for the overall tone and overall, I think, characterization of how he feels about the situation and about the relationship with China. But perhaps even more importantly will be his speech on May 20th, which will be his inauguration speech. So really, this period of time between Election Day to inauguration will be a test of how Lai intends to conduct himself on all matters, whether that's national security or on other issues, and he'll have many audiences watching him.
Okay, so that has to be worded very carefully, both those speeches waiting. Let's go now to the issue of Xi Jinping's purge of his military that we know from last year, starting in last year, August, there was the purging of Li Shangfu, who's the defense minister. Previous to that, of course, there were the rocket force generals also who were purged. Now, Bloomberg saying that this is a sign, and more recently, even more purges, this sort of clean out. Bloomberg is saying this is a sign that Beijing is not ready to move on Taiwan, that is actually a sign of weakness, but others are saying that actually this is, we should be seeing this as specific preparation for possibly moving on Taiwan. What's your view?
So based on the reports I have been seeing, I think the intelligence kind of information shows that he's doing all the purge because there's a high level of corruption that is going on in the military. And what I read was that some of the missiles are not even filled with the fuels that can properly fire. And so I think the U.S., based on the information, has made the judgment that China may not be capable of actually making an attack on Taiwan. But at the same time, if you look at his level, like he is able to actually control and purge people, it shows that his strength within the party still has a high level of control over the party. And so I think it shows both that even though he's not capable, he's still very capable of controlling the party. And he can still make the party moving toward the direction he wants, and the military as well, PLA as well. But I think China's domestic issue is the prime issue for Xi Jinping right now on his head. Economic issues, social issues, I think that's, for him, maintaining social stability domestically is more important right now than launching an attack on Taiwan.
Okay, so Lai I-Chung, waiting there, does not believe in the argument that this is actually the beginning of the steps towards military action or invasion of Taiwan. What's your view? Reuters is reporting that officials in Taiwan say that they expect some significant military activity in spring.
That's based on the what we anticipate from Chinese disillusion about the Taiwan future political directions. Especially China said it out loud how they dislike a certain person. So the
You're talking about Lai Ching-te?
Yeah, okay. The same Lai, the future President Lai, if he got elected. Which means that it will be very difficult for China to swallow by saying all those bad words in beforehand and then just take it as fait accompli, not doing anything about it. So I think this is more of the action patterns and anticipation that we believe China probably would do something militarily. But that does not mean that the militarily will be equivalent to the military attack or the high rising and hostility toward Taiwan. More or less, it's more like a political gesture about what the things that you should not do to show our determination about what our red line is.
Yeah, so to follow through on the threats that you say they've made during the campaign. Alex, I want to get your view on this debate about the purges in China's military. Do you see it as a sign of weakness, say, as the Bloomberg side, or the other side that says, no, this is about rooting out any obstacles to Xi's political aims, and it's simply, the beginning of this process?
I think if we get into this issue deeper and consult with how many meetings that Xi Jinping chaired inside China and emphasize the party's control of all segments, including party controls the gun, I think it shows, I would not say weakness, but his worry, even after 2 terms, that still he faces these kind of issue within the Communist Party. I believe that he probably must be very angry with the result or the events that had taken place. I agree that he is still in full control. He can still push his agenda, but I think he would probably have a troubled mind, even self-criticism of that how that China, under his watch, for over 10 years, and still those existing issues like corruption and other so-called misconduct still exists within the party, within the military. And that's something would probably push him to even strengthen his control of all sectors within China. And that's something that we need to watch. I would not say that whether he is still strong or it shows his weakness. But this is a matter that we should be very vigilant about. And it may affect his decision or a particular policy.
So do you think that these purges are simply about corruption, or are they about Taiwan?
Well, I do not have sufficient evidence to say it with confidence that which plays a bigger role in this purge.
Okay. Amanda, let's move on to dialogue. Now, everybody agrees that it would be much better to have dialogue between Taiwan and China. How effective do you think the DPP's messaging has been in terms of they try to really stress that this is a joint responsibility by both sides to dialogue? And, you know, if we can compare the period when China did not speak to the U.S. post Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Now, America at that time was very firm in its messaging, isn't it? That a responsible, leading power, great power in the world, must have dialogue.
So I mean, I agree that dialogue is a joint responsibility. It should be something that Beijing and a potential future DPP administration should care about. The problem here is that there is a gap between what Beijing demands as its political condition for dialogue and what the DPP is willing to offer, okay? So, and that gap we haven't seen closed, even under Tsai's administration. And I say even under Tsai's administration because Tsai has really carved out a fairly moderate and cautious and relatively stabilizing approach to the cross-strait dynamic. Now, what Tsai said in 2016, I think is perhaps worth repeating on the part of a future President Lai, and that is that she recognized the historic reality of the 1992 consensus, and said that cross-strait affairs should be conducted in accordance with the ROC Constitution and relevant, other relevant laws, which is essentially a nod to Beijing's demand of an acknowledgement of their position, which is a one China position. It's not an explicit expression of it, but it's meant to be meeting Beijing's demands partway. But Beijing's response in 2016 was that this was an incomplete test answer. And so we still face that problem, even with a Lai administration, and even if he does choose to repeat that formulation.
And so where does that leave us? Do you think that there can ever be dialogue between the DPP and China?
Well, I don't think anything is, I don't think we should say that anything is impossible, okay? I think, though, that for dialogue to resume would require both sides to make it a priority. And I'm not sure that it would be in the priority of either Beijing or DPP administration to resume dialogue with each other.
Right, as in to compromise on their positions?
Yes.
Right, okay, Wei-ting, prior to Xi Jinping and prior to Tsai Ing-wen, during the Sun Sui-bian era, which was also a Democratic Progressive Party, there was dialogue between the two sides, albeit through envoys. So it was Xi Jinping that imposed the condition for this dialogue. Do you think there's any condition, any environment where things could move back towards perhaps that arrangement, that prior arrangement? I mean, international pressure or anything like that?
So if we compare the international political environment now to, say, during the Chen Shui-bian administration, again, this is very different. China was under a different leadership, And during that time, China had informal term limits. And so we're in a very uncharted territory right now with Xi Jinping's third term. And so I'm not entirely sure whether Taiwan or the new, presidents can unilaterally set that condition. It really requires two to tango, basically. And echoing what Amanda was saying, China has made it very firm on the conditions on which they're willing to talk, even though Tsai Ing-wen back in 2016 did almost say entirely what Beijing wants, except for mentioning 1992 consensus. But if you look at the content, it is very moderate and it is very, in line with ROC constitution. And so I feel like moving forward for China and Taiwan to start conversation, Beijing has to recognize that they are a part of this cross-strait peace, and they have to take some level of responsibility if they're really thinking about, regional peace and stability is important. And I want to mention one more point is that we can find creative ways to do, cross-strait dialogue and conversation. It doesn't have to all the way to be, open door, like top level conversation. Envoy is an alternative. APEC, like we have different models. I feel like we can start, the DPP has to, and I think they are sending out that signal, like if you look at Tsai Ing-wen's January, speech, she is mentioning that she thinks that and welcome conversation between Taiwan and China. So I think the DPP is trying to send out that signal to Beijing, but it depends on whether Beijing respond to that.
Lai I-Chung, can the DPP do more in terms of the lower level communication dialogue that Wei Ting is talking about, or is it already doing this?
I have to say that in terms of the cross-strait functional management, there are still some communications, although not direct dialogue or the speaking to each other. So that was how some of the functional issues, such as during the COVID era, how our people in China, they were able to have a charter flight back to Taiwan. So that was one example. But I would say that the dialogue people refer to usually that means that the governmental communications as well as the political level of the communications. For both, the Xi Jinping demanded that you have to publicly recognize the 92 consensus under the One China principles. So it's not just a 92 consensus, it's about the 92 consensus based on the One China principles. And this is where the both sides they have differences. That the DPP is willing to talk with no preconditions, but the Beijing demand that unless you acknowledge that, otherwise I'm not going to talk with you. So this is the issue here. DPP is willing to talk even though China insists there's a One China principle. But the Beijing insists that you have to acknowledge the One China principle before I can talk to you. So that's how the communication is being broken down.
Alex, KMT's position is to have more of the low-level exchanges and interactions. You also say that the dialogue needs to be mutual as equals. Is that correct?
Well, for functional dialogue that we had getting into, it had always been that way. Every agreement that been signed between a KMT administration with the other side was a result of constant, difficult negotiation back and forth. Every time it's a tug of war. So talking to China, negotiating with them is not an easy task. But at least you need to have a base that enable that communication line, enable that people on both sides by the authorized agency to sit down and talk about the issues that concern that people's interests and benefit. I think for KMT, the base has always been there. We don't need to re-register or say that again and again, reassure, because the base is already there. And that's why that during this campaign that we have always said that, you know, do we want to have another 4 years of no communication or not? You know, this is, of course, the election result is the choice of the people. But we have to, based on our experience, even with Madam President Tsai Ing-wen's first inaugural address, Beijing still gave her a incomplete, right? So if we, you know, it's very hard, very challenging for us to think about. You know, people vote on different issues, but on national security matters, I think if Vice President Tsai is elected, that will be top, the #1 issue that we all need to face.
Okay. Amanda, let's talk about, we see that Lai is in the lead there. Let's have a look again at the results. So 39%, he's maintaining that. 630,000 votes. Hou Yu-ih of the KMT on 33%, 530,000, and Ko Wen-je of the TPP, 26%, 430,000 votes. So if there is a Lai president, Amanda, the polls basically predict that there would be a split legislature. So the current DPP control of that legislature, that parliament, would not continue. If that's the case, in what ways would this frustrate Taiwan's ability in terms of undertaking U.S.-China policy?
So first, it depends on whether the KMT can secure a majority in the legislature. If they can, that's one scenario. If they can't, then the Taiwan People's Party's position becomes very important. And both the DPP and the KMT will be courting them so that the TPP works with them. Okay. If we assume that Lai will be dealing with the KMT majority in the LY, we'll be faced with considerable gridlock in policy making. He will be faced with tremendous political challenges in agenda setting. And so this has implications.
In which areas in particular?
So this has implications in terms of national security for the defense budget.
But all parties agree, you know, the opposition parties want to increase defense spending to 3%?
Yes, but again, going back to the difference between campaign promises and actual governance, and we've seen earlier in the show that different party members in the KMT have different views on defense, right? And when it comes down to acting as an opposition, it's possible that political priorities will trump optimal policy. So that is definitely a risk. I would also say, though, just to add that a divided government in Taiwan under Lai might provide, sort of paradoxically, some degree of assurance to Beijing. Because from Beijing's perspective, then, they will have greater confidence that nothing too radical will come out of a Lai administration, potentially.
Okay, so it kind of tempers the Lai win if it's then accompanied by a split legislature, is your point. Okay, waiting. Let's talk perhaps about the economy and how you know, various policy could be frustrated. Amanda talked about defense, we can talk about economy.
So I think if it's a split legislature, like Amanda said, it really depends on what the composition is. Then we will see different coalition happening. And I think we had a minority government before, you know, under Chen Shui-bian administration. And research shows that they're still able to pass bills. I mean, fewer bills for sure, but it doesn't mean parties cannot work together. It basically means there are more veto players in the policy-making process. So it will constrain Lai's agenda setting, not just national defense, but on social policy as well as on economic policy. But it also may incentivize his cabinet to propose a more moderate, you know, policy that are going to generate more consensus before he send it to the floor, to the legislature to work with the, you know.
So kind of be like checks and balances that
yeah, so it might not be, we might think it's a bad thing, but if we think about politics as compromise, you know, we have different views, and having a majority government sometimes gives the presidents, the cabinet mandate to do what they want, but it doesn't mean that's what the people, the majority want. So having a split government can provide that kind of check and balance in the system. That might be a blessing in disguise.
So yeah, testimony of democracy working. But on the economy, let's talk about ECFA, which is the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement. Now, the opposition parties want to resurrect maybe I should direct this to Alex, want to resurrect the Trade and Services Pact. Now, this is the one that triggered the Sunflower movement in 2014 because they were scared or concerned about 2 points. Number one was the way that it was being handled, and number two was the fact that they believed it would speed up integration with China's economy.
Well, the events took place in 2013, the surface trade agreement revoked, and the 2014, the Sunflower movement, was under the context that people in Taiwan felt that the cross-strait relations is getting too fast or too close. But the situation is different now. So our priority, as we proposed, is that we wanted to see an extension of ECFA as an interim arrangement before we can seek for, CPTPP and other more remote regional, free trade arrangement, and make it functional to maintain or enable Taiwan's enterprise and business to keep that preferential treatment under the ECFA and maintain such a competitiveness against our friends in Japan and Korea. Because business competition is essential in the ECFA, not necessarily a kind of compromise with the PRC. After all, ECFA is a one-sided preferential tariff treatment. And the goods service agreement will definitely go as a priority. The service trade agreement that was controversial would be at the bottom of our agenda.
And is there any concern that there might be too much economic dependency on China?
Well, we are not terribly worried about those because in the past several years, because of Beijing's conduct, their policy to private sector, as well as the COVID impact, we have already have the business movement to Southeast Asia.
Okay, right, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much for all our guests today joining us on this Taiwan's Talk special. But Taiwan Plus is broadcasting live for another 5 hours. Up next is Taiwan Votes, followed by Taiwan Connects. Taiwan Talks is also bringing you a post-election analysis show on Sunday. So stay with us and we'll see you again tomorrow.